Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I am your host, David Krayden. Happy Saturday. We're having a great weekend. It's November the 9th, 2024. Just every day brings another round of applause for what's happening south of the border and what can happen if we can keep the Conservative Party conservative in Canada. And when we come back, we got some great stuff to show you.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Please like the station now if you can, because it breaks down the borders, it breaks down the parameters of YouTube suppression and Trudeau censorship. And that's what we continue to face on this station. All conservative stations that talk policy face this problem, especially if you talk about Ukraine. So we'll say that very quietly. We will be talking about Ukraine today and the fact that it's time to stop the wars, and Donald Trump is going to stop the wars. But it is incredible what is happening right now, because Trump is, as I said yesterday, he's not going to the fake news to get his message out. He's going directly to social media, and it's very exciting. I hope a lot of you had a chance to watch yesterday's, and I'll say this right now. Please share this broadcast with your friends and your family, and subscribe if you'd like to, or resubscribe if you've been unsubscribed by YouTube. Happens all the time. To stations my size, or the large ones as well. People are being unsubscribed all the time just by a bureaucrat's whim. Yeah, bureaucrats who work for the private. There are bureaucrats in the private sector too. So I don't really know where to start today, but I think we'll start with the day 2 of the Trump announcements. And this is about free speech. And like I said, this is the primary reason I supported the election of Donald Trump. I was enthusiastic about Bobby Kennedy Jr., was overjoyed when he jumped into the Trump camp. I thought it made the campaign that much stronger. And Kennedy has got so many good things to offer in terms of public health issues. So that was a great thing. But the reason I was 100% behind Donald Trump is because he is dedicated to free speech. The Biden-Harris administration tried to actually establish an office of disinformation within the Department of Homeland Security. You remember that one? Yeah, Mary Poppins on what is it? TikTok? Was she on TikTok? Well, that would have been ironic if it had been TikTok. But there she was, singing away about the dangers of disinformation. And there was such a backlash that the Biden camp didn't exactly get rid of their office of disinformation. They just quietly moved it from the Department of Homeland Security into the Department of Justice. So it was active during the Freedom Convoy, actually. And we did a story on that, how there was intelligence was being fed in through the Department of Disinformation back to the Trudeau government. And it was a circular net of nonsense. Ironically, they were feeding each other disinformation when it was supposed to be an office. Maybe that's what they mean when they say it's an office creating disinformation. That's what it ended up being. But Donald Trump, I hope this isn't too long, but just listen to what Trump is talking about. This is monumental.
Free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple. Just like dominoes, one by one, they'll go down. That's why today I'm announcing my plan to shatter the left-wing censorship regime and to reclaim the right to free speech for all Americans. And reclaim is a very important word in this case because they've taken it away. In recent weeks, bombshell reports have confirmed that a sinister group of deep state bureaucrats, Silicon Valley tyrants, left-wing activists, and depraved corporate news media have been conspiring to manipulate and silence the American people. They have collaborated to suppress vital information on everything from elections to public health. The censorship cartel must be dismantled and destroyed, and it must happen immediately. And here's my plan. First, within hours of my inauguration, I will sign an executive order banning any federal department or agency from colluding with any organization, business, or person to censor, limit, categorize, or impede the lawful speech of American citizens. I will then ban federal money from being used to label domestic speech as mis- or disinformation. And I will begin the process of identifying and firing every federal bureaucrat who has engaged in domestic censorship, directly or indirectly, whether they are the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health, Human Services, the FBI, the DOJ, no matter who they are. Second, I will order the Department of Justice to investigate all parties involved in the new online censorship regime, which is absolutely destructive and terrible, and to aggressively prosecute any and all crimes identified. These include possible violations of...
I'll just interject here for a second. Don't you wish you heard the Conservative Party leader saying anything like this about Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, instead of saying they're going to have their own version of it? Oh, we need to hear this in Canada desperately.
Federal civil rights law, campaign finance laws, federal election law, securities law, and antitrust laws, the Hatch Act, and a host of other potential criminal, civil, regulatory, and constitutional offenses. To assist in these efforts, I am urging House Republicans to immediately send preservation letters, and we have to do this right now, to the Biden administration, the Biden campaign, and every Silicon Valley tech giant, ordering them not to destroy evidence of censorship. Third, upon my inauguration as president, I will ask Congress to send a bill to my desk revising Section 230 to get big online platforms out of censorship business. From now on, digital platforms should only qualify for immunity protection under Section 230 if they meet high standards of neutrality, transparency, fairness, and non-discrimination. We should require these platforms to increase their efforts to take down unlawful content such as child exploitation and promoting terrorism, while dramatically curtailing their power to arbitrarily restrict lawful speech. Fourth, we need to break up the entire toxic censorship industry that has arisen under the false guise of tackling so-called mis- and disinformation. The federal government should immediately stop funding all nonprofits and academic programs that support this authoritarian project. If any U.S. university is discovered to have engaged in censorship activities or election interferences in the past, such as flagging social media content for removal of blacklisting, those universities should lose federal research dollars and federal student loan support for a period of 5 years and maybe more. We should also enact new laws laying out clear criminal penalties for federal bureaucrats who partner with private entities to do an end run around the Constitution and deprive Americans of their First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment rights. In other words, deprive them of their vote. And once you lose those elections, and once you lose your borders like we have, you no longer have a country. Furthermore, to confront the problems of major platforms being infiltrated by legions of former deep staters and intelligence officials, there should be a 7-year cooling-off period before any employee of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DNI, DHS, or DOD is allowed to take a job at a company possessing vast quantities of U.S. user data. Fifth, the time has finally come for Congress to pass a digital Bill of Rights. This should include a right to digital due process. In other words, government officials should need a court order to take down online content, not send information requests such as the FBI was sending to Twitter. Furthermore, when users of big online platforms have their content or accounts removed throttled, shadow banned, or otherwise restricted, no matter what name they use. They should have the right to be informed that it's happening, the right to a specific explanation of the reason why, and the right to a timely appeal. In addition, all users over the age of 18 should have the right to opt out of content moderation and curation entirely and receive an unmanipulated stream of information if they so choose. The fight for free speech is a matter of victory or death for America and for the survival of Western civilization itself. When I am president, this whole rotten system of censorship and information control will be ripped out of the system at large. There won't be anything left. By restoring free speech, we'll begin to reclaim our democracy and save our nation. Thank you, and God bless America.
Yeah, we need a Bill of Rights like this. We need an emphasis on free speech from the Conservative Party of Canada. We're not getting that. We need to get that because, believe me, if they're not talking about free speech in opposition, they won't be talking about it in government. We need to continue to remind them. This is what I say. We're not here to be apologists. We're not here to be in the pocket. We're not here to just echo what the Conservative Party is saying. We're here to agree with them when they're right. We're here to oppose them when they're wrong. We're here to encourage them to do the conservative thing. Act in accordance with small c conservative principles on all of these policies. This is why we're here. Not to just be a cheerleading section and say, well, there's a reason for that. It's okay. He has to say that. No, I worked on the Hill for too many years saying those sorts of things, and I couldn't stomach it anymore. Couldn't stand saying those things because it's utter balderdash. Now, Trump is putting the warning out, and I know there's talk out there that some of these messages that are coming out now, these 10-point messages, are 2 years old. Doesn't matter if they're current, 6 months old, or 2 months old. They're coming out now directly to social media because Trump is letting it be known what has just happened with this election. So there's some pushback. Oh, yeah, people are scared about what does this really mean? And I can tell you what it really means. It means we're going to have some freedom in this country. But the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board was asked this week, what if Trump fires you? Let's listen to this.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Mike?
No. You know, the funny thing is I first heard when I was a kid. I came from an evangelical home where we used to hear a lot of conspiratorial information. And of course, one of the organizations was always flagged in the literature was the Federal Reserve. That this was not a government organization. This was an organization run by the banks to control monetary policy, and that the federal government in the United States really had no control over it. What did we just see there? Apparently, the federal government has no control over the Federal Reserve Board if it can make a decision like that. If the chairman of the board can say, oh, I'm not leaving. And he went farther in saying Trump can't even fire bureaucrats. There's a war going on in the deep state right now because it knows Trump is after them. You know, I got to show you this. Thank you for one of my viewers giving me this headline inspiration. Happy days are here again. This is my column in Human Events that went up yesterday. Trump's victory might have saved America. It's one of the best columns. Well, I really like this column. And I think I wrote it very quickly just after the election victory. And it sums up exactly why I think it was a great thing for America and potentially for Canada as well. Now, let's listen to Chrystia Freeland here once again and look at the fear in her eyes. And she talks about, wow, the Trudeau government doesn't know what to make of this Trump victory because you expected what would Trudeau have done usually? You know what he did when conservative parties win in Europe? Bang, he's on the air saying, here we go with these far right populist parties, these authoritarian populist parties are taking control in Europe. Didn't quite say that about Donald Trump, although he thinks that. He couldn't say that because he's got to work with this guy for however long Trudeau might be in power when Donald Trump is president. Trudeau might be gone by January 2025. It's entirely possible. But given the fact we're almost at mid-November and he's hanging on, could last till Christmas. And if he lasts till Christmas, he'll be prime minister on January 20th, 2025, when Donald Trump is inaugurated. Trudeau, as dumb as he can be, and he can be as dumb as a bag of hammers, to invoke that old Ontario statement, he knows he has to deal with Donald Trump just as he had to deal with Donald Trump when he was president the last time. But let's listen to Chrystia Freeland. It's scary.
At the IMF World Bank meetings in Washington a couple of weeks ago, on the sidelines of the IMF World Bank meetings in Washington, the G7 finance ministers concluded a very important agreement for the support of Ukraine. This is something that our G7 leaders announced at their summit at the beginning of the summer. A really novel and creative and collaborative arrangement whereby using the assets, the frozen assets of the Russian central bank as security, we have come together to extend a $50 billion loan, a $50 billion sum of money to Ukraine. That is Canada, the US, the EU, Japan, and the UK working together. Canada is providing $5 billion of that sum, $5 billion Canadian. $50 billion is an important source of support for Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have that.
Okay, once again, Chrystia Freeland is describing Canada as backstop here. We're the way, because Trump is saying no more money. No more money. Vladimir Zelensky, no more money. The bank is closed. You're not getting any more. So Canada's going to fill that gap? You'll find out in a minute how ludicrous that actually is. If I don't get banned from this platform for saying the obvious. But this is absolutely foolishness.
Now, it was intentional that we wrapped that up a couple of weeks ago. I'm glad they have that support.
Okay, so, and thank you for True North for using that. I was too lazy to edit myself this morning. But that is indicative of the craziness that's going on. It continues to inhabit the minds of Liberal cabinet ministers. Canada's not going to make up the difference. Canada's not going to keep the war in Ukraine going if Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin decide to have a peace deal. Canada's not going to have any say in this. Canada is not going to keep the war going with a couple of more $1 billion. Even if it could give $50 billion, which it doesn't have, it's not going to keep the war going. But we're going to hear in a second how dangerous this talk is. And before I say that, remember Chrystia Freeland is hobnobbing with neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. She worked for a pro-Nazi newspaper early in her career that said nice things about the Waffen-SS. Her grandfather was a Nazi propagandist working in Poland during the Second World War. She has no credibility to talk about Ukraine. Now let's listen to Andrew Leslie. This is former Lieutenant General Andrew Leslie, who was for a time the government whip under Justin Trudeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay? My intent is to offer some criticism of the status quo so that we can learn and then perhaps in question period get into some solutions. Essentially, in my opinion, strong, secure, engage, the precursor to the current defense policy, delivered nothing substantive in terms of modern military equipment, which saw Canada, in fact, become weaker, more insecure, and essentially absent from the deployable stables of troops required for either United Nations missions or, of course, NATO. The 2024 defense policy update of our North Strong and Free is no better, unfortunately, in that it promises some urgently needed equipment years from now, but nothing today. Indeed, the 2024 defense spend will be less than that of 2023.
Okay, so Canada can't even keep its national defense going. And yet it wants to give billions of dollars to Ukraine to keep their defense going, to secure their borders. Canada is not going to be able to secure its borders when Donald Trump starts deporting tens of millions, even millions. Where do you think they're going to go? They're going to go north, and we can't even defend our own border from them. And we won't, because Justin Trudeau will be out there again saying, come on, refugees of the world, come to Canada, like he said in the past. But let's listen to Leslie. He is the grandson of two defense ministers. Yeah, he's been a lifelong liberal, but he's got the guts to condemn the Trudeau government for its absolute stupidity in defense spending. The one thing he doesn't say is Ukraine here, but it's obvious he's starting to get the message.
Of course, we're well aware of what just happened down in the United States. Both Republicans and Democrats are united and increasingly vocal about telling Canada how disappointed, frustrated, and fed up they are with Canada's failure to defend itself and their allies, with a special mention on the Arctic. Meanwhile, as we know, and I was involved in the last NAFTA renegotiations, that's coming due at a time when a variety of key players down south have articulated clearly the base of 3% perhaps looms on the horizon, and how defense, security, trade, and border security are all intertwined.
Interesting.
At all this time, at this time of crisis internationally, with what's happening in the Middle East, in Ukraine, Canada's military readiness is at its lowest level in 50 years. Canada spent last year in 2023 more money on consultants and professional services than it did on the Army, Navy, and Air Force combined.
If there's one takeaway from this message from Andrew Leslie, it's the fact the Trudeau government spent more on consultants to tell the government what they already knew or already wanted to hear than it spends on the Army, Navy, and Air Force combined. That is incredible.
Which, quite frankly, is madness.
Yes, it's madness.
The Army has over 50% of its vehicle fleets which are awaiting spare parts and technicians. The Navy is struggling mightily, bless them, to keep elderly warships, a handful of them at sea, specifically in the Indo-Pacific, and they're desperately short of trained sailors. And the Air Force has been unable to participate in significant NATO deterrent exercises either up north or out over the oceans in conjunction with our friends and allies, because they don't have the pilots, the spare parts, or the money to fly the aircraft. In the Arctic, which is many times larger than Europe, Canada has fewer than 300 military support staff who are not deterrent. They're essentially unarmed. Some of them are part-time, bless them. And about 1,600 Skidoo equipped with rifles, Canadian Rangers, who are not combatants. Their role is to observe and report. The bottom line is that Canada has no permanently assigned combat element.
So, if you missed it, we've got 300 Indigenous folks riding around in skidoos with a rifle by their side, defending the entire Arctic for Canada.
To deter potential.
And the Trudeau government wants to go to fight Russia?
Presence by the Russians or the Chinese, who are showing up in our waters with increasing frequency. But other people do. Russia specifically has between 25 to 35,000 combat troops deployed in their Arctic, with huge amounts of operational equipment, air, land, and sea. The United States, bless them, has 22,000 full-time military and part-time military professionals, with more equipment than the entirety of the Canadian forces in terms of combat delivery. So really, thank you, America, for defending our Arctic. We are facing unprecedented dangers and challenges, and quite frankly, I see no sense of urgency to change, to modify, to re-guide the efforts of the government towards supporting and assisting the Canadian forces. Some facts. We have less than 35 military personnel deployed on UN missions. In 2003, we had close to 2,500. We are the only NATO nation whose level of military operational readiness is going down when everyone else is skyrocketing up. We have the longest and the least efficient procurement system in NATO, indeed in any nation that I can find. We are the only nation in NATO that does not have a costed plan to get to 2% of GDP, which was first agreed to by Minister of Defense in 2008 and reiterated in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and I could go on. We are the only NATO nation whose defense minister has publicly admitted that he could not convince his fellow cabinet members of the importance of NATO defense spending and the 2% GDP. And as mentioned already, we're the only NATO nation whose defense budget decreased this year. Mr. Chair, I look forward to your questions.
Wow. That's all I can say at the end of that as well. This is the guy who spent 30 years in the military. Didn't always agree with everything Andrew Leslie said. He certainly would have made a hell of a better defense minister than the joker they put in there, Harjit Sajjan, who did nothing for the military except disgrace it. But, of course, let's have a look at what Justin Trudeau got the situation in hand. I spoke with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. We spoke about the war in Ukraine and North Korea's troop deployment in support of Russia's aggression. Canada's increasing our defense spending, lie, and delivering significant support for Ukraine's defense, because in the face of rising threats like these, we need a strong and united alliance. This is just the worst kind of bullshit I can ever imagine Trudeau coming out with. He's not spending more in defense. He's spending more in defense 10 years from now, when he won't even be government. Our defense policy is a joke. The defense budget, it's a joke. It's all projections in 10 years. It's all projected to happen down the road. Can you imagine if that had been the defense policy in 1939? We're going to spend this money in 1949, after which, of course, the Second World War had already been over. NATO is not going to be around much longer anyway as an organization, so Trudeau won't have to worry about 2%. But he should worry about having a credible military that could defend Canada or be a credible ally. He's never been concerned about that. And don't give me this crap that you are going to settle things in Ukraine. You haven't got a clue in hell. Look at this. Total contributions. This is from Grok. If you ever use that AI on X. Over time, Canada's total financial support to Ukraine has reached significant figures, with mentions of over $12.4 billion in various forms of assistance, including loans, humanitarian aid, and military support since January 2022. New $5 billion part of $50 billion loan. And it's not a loan. We're not going to get it back. This is crap. We're not getting the $5 billion back, just like we're not getting our Leopard tanks back that we gave Ukraine. They've all been blown to pieces on the battlefield. We didn't replenish them. The Canadian Army is basically down to Leopard tanks that can't even be repaired. That's the truth about what we have in Canada. We've given it all away to the stupid war and this stupid Zelensky, who's got his hands out constantly looking for more money. And I tell you, that is a national disgrace. And Justin Trudeau's responsible for that. And Justin Trudeau is not going to matter to he's irrelevant. Yeah. I'm going to have Viva Frei on the show next week. We don't know. It's Tuesday or Wednesday. We're going to be talking about why the Conservative Party has become the uniparty with the Liberals on foreign policy. They're in lockstep with the Liberals on Ukraine and other foreign policy issues. And why they become the uniparty now on misinformation and disinformation. Why are they hauling Canadian journalists in front of the Security Committee to ask them about whether they're Russian agents? This reminds me of the House Un-American Activities Committee that raged through Congress for almost 20 years. But it was at its most powerful during the 50s when they would bring witnesses in front of them and badger them to the point of tears in some point to get them to admit that they had attended a meeting at some time in their life that might have been sponsored by the Communist Party. If so, blacklisted. Now, yes, communism was a menace in the 1950s, but everybody should not be tarred with the same brush. And journalists who are small c conservatives and are involved in an indictment in the United States should not being hauled in front of Canadian parliamentary committees and accused of being Russian spies or taking Russian money when these MPs haven't got a clue in hell whether this information is true or false. They haven't got it. All they want to do is threaten. Viva Frei writes here, there's no difference between the so-called CPC and the tyrannical Liberal Party. They are two wings of the same corrupt bird. Earlier this week, in the purest form of modern-day McCarthyism, which is what I call it, you will ever see, Parliament is going after Lauren Chen, summoning her to testify on alleged Russian government allegedly using tenant media to spread Russian propaganda to undermine the West. Listen to the idiotic diatribes coming from so-called conservative Raquel Danko. And of course, Jennifer O'Connell from the Liberals. Apparently, Raquel and the Conservative Party have forgotten about what a bunch of lying scoundrels the Liberals are. Or maybe the Conservatives have been equal lying scoundrels the entire time. This is the absolute state of Canada. Absolute madness. Absolute madness. I showed you that clip yesterday. We're going to have David on the show next week to talk about this because this is a bloody disgrace to Canada, and the Conservative Party is supposed to believe in free speech. Hauling these journalists in front of this committee, trying to force them to violate their own freedom of speech, to force them to violate their legal rights in front of this damned committee that's not investigating China, that's not investigating Chinese election interference, that now wants to worry about Russia, about alleged Russia trying to undermine our democracy. Not China or India plotting horrible, nefarious, murderous schemes. It's all about India and it's about Russia. Let's not talk about China, or as the conservatives like to say, Beijing, Beijing. That's what they want to talk about now, not China. And they want to put journalists in front of these committees and browbeat them and shame them until they get the answers they want. Because they're so concerned about misinformation and disinformation, except they're the ones wielding these tools. They're the ones slashing away with these knives of misinformation and disinformation. And I tell you, I've absolutely had my fill, my stomach full of these damn conservatives acting like liberals. Let's get them. Let's get these social conservatives. Let's get these conservative journalists. Let's get these independent media people. Because if they act that way in opposition, are they going to act any better when they're government? Think about that. Ask yourself that question. If they're acting this despicably in opposition, don't expect them to act any better in government. We need to demand better from the Conservative Party of Canada and from the official opposition. Not to knuckle under to liberal tyranny, not to knuckle under to these committees looking for Russian agents under every bed. This is absolute foolishness. So, and as I said, and I've said in the past, Trudeau has now become the neo-McCarthy. It's not about communists. It's about anybody who disagrees with Justin Trudeau, anybody who's against the Liberal Party. I thought the Conservative Party was against that. I thought they had an alternative. Well, they better wake up to this because I'm not going to shut up about it, and other conservatives aren't going to shut up about it either. And it's time we moved on. And I am absolutely ashamed at my old friend James Bazan, the Conservative Party defense critic, for being part of this. Absolutely. He knows better. He should know better. Stop navel gazing about Russian agents under every bed, and get on to Chinese election interference. That's what this committee should be looking at. Not hauling up. She's even afraid to go on X now because she's being accused of being a Russian agent. I don't know Lauren Chen. I don't know. In fact, I don't know any of the people who were indicted in this Department of Justice matter who were accused of taking money from Russia. I don't know any of them. And I know I've never taken a cent from Russia. I've never been offered it. And I wouldn't on principle. I wouldn't take money from any government because you're in the power of any government when you do that. I wouldn't take money from the Canadian government because I'm not going to repeat the lies of the Liberal Party and the Trudeau government. So that's the issue here. But I don't know where they got their funding from. I have no idea. I do know that I liked a lot of journalism they're doing, and I didn't see anything in it promoting Russia or Russia undermining Canada or the United States. So this is all balderdash. Again, it's prime BS, and it's what you get from the Trudeau government. I better shut up because I've gone over time. Thank you so much for watching today. Remember, everybody, resolve to resist. Keep on fighting. The fight's not over. We got a huge victory last Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, with Donald Trump being elected, and that's going to have an impact on Canada. It's going to have a positive one, and I hope Pierre Poilievre wakes up to that fact that it's great news for Canada that Donald Trump is president. It's great news. If it only because we're going to get the Keystone XL pipeline back going, thousands of Canadian jobs. This is great news for Canada. I'll be back again tomorrow with all the news you need to know. God bless you.